I built a construction empire out of a rusted pickup truck and a $200 loan from my father. I survived 3 recessions, a hostile buyout attempt, and a business partner who tried to forge my signature on a loan document. But none of that prepared me for the day I learned my own wife valued a spa weekend in Napa more than my life. I was lying on a gurney in the cardiac unit, a tube down my throat, when I heard the nurse call her to tell her I might not make it through the night. What she said back still echoes in my ears louder than my own heartbeat monitor. If you've ever wondered what a man does when he finds out his family has been waiting for him to die, stay with me, because I did something about it, and I'm going to tell you exactly what. My name is Walter. I'm 67 years old, and until 11 months ago, I thought I had built a good life. Not just a wealthy one, a good one, the kind you're supposed to be proud of when you look back at the end. I own Kessler Brothers Construction, a company I started in Ohio with nothing but a truck, a toolbox, and enough stubbornness to work 18-hour days for a decade straight. There were no brothers, by the way. My father used to joke that Kessler Brothers sounded more trustworthy to a bank loan officer than Walter Kessler, one guy with a hammer. He wasn't wrong. That name got me my first contract, pouring foundations for a strip mall outside Columbus. 41 years later, that same name was on cranes across 4 states, on high-rise developments, on hospital wings, on a football stadium renovation that made the local news. I tell you all this not to brag, son, because that's how I've come to think of anyone listening to this, like you're sitting across from me at my kitchen table and I owe you the truth, but because you need to understand what I had, so you understand what it meant to almost lose it in one single, ordinary Thursday morning. I was at a job site inspection in Cincinnati, walking the framing on a new medical office building, when the pain hit. It didn't announce itself gently. One second I was running my hand along a steel beam, checking the welds, and the next second it felt like someone had reached into my chest and closed a fist around my heart. I've been punched before. I've been in construction accidents. I know pain. This was different. This was pain with intention behind it, like my own body had turned against me and meant it. I went down on one knee first, then all the way to the plywood subfloor. My foreman, a good kid named Marcus who'd worked for me for 6 years, was the one who called 911. He held my hand the whole way to the hospital, and I remember thinking, in the haze of it all, that a man I paid to swing a hammer showed me more loyalty in that ambulance than my own wife had shown me in the last 3 years of our marriage. I just didn't know it yet. Not consciously. Sometimes the body knows the truth before the mind is ready to accept it. The emergency room doctors moved fast. A widowmaker, they called it later, a full blockage of the main artery feeding the front of my heart. The kind of heart attack that either kills you in the first hour or it doesn't, and there's very little middle ground. They got me stabilized enough to ask for an emergency contact, and I gave them my wife's name, Denise. We'd been married 9 years. She was my second marriage. My first wife, Carol, passed from cancer 14 years ago. God rest her. And I'd spent 5 years alone before Denise came into my life at a charity gala for the Children's Hospital. She was warm back then, or she seemed warm. She laughed at my jokes. She asked about my late wife with what I thought was genuine tenderness. I fell for her hard, the way a lonely man in his 50s falls when someone finally makes him feel young again. The doctor called her from a hospital phone and put it on speaker so I could hear her voice, because he thought it might calm me down. He had no idea what he was about to hand me instead. It rang 4 times. I remember counting. Then I heard it, the click of the call connecting, and behind her voice, unmistakably, the low hum of a hairdryer. "Hello?" Denise said, sounding mildly annoyed at the interruption, like I'd called during a manicure. "Mrs. Kessler, this is Dr. Ferris at Cincinnati Mercy General. I'm with your husband, Walter. He's suffered a serious heart attack. We're doing everything we can, but I need to be honest with you. His condition is critical, and I strongly recommend you come to the hospital as soon as possible." The hairdryer clicked off. There was a pause, a real pause, long enough that for one foolish, desperate second, I let myself believe she was in shock, that she was about to burst into tears and ask which hospital, which room, how fast could she get there. Instead, she sighed. Not a worried sigh, an inconvenienced one. The kind of sigh you give when a waiter tells you they're out of the fish you wanted. "You have got to be kidding me," she said. "Ma'am, I understand this is a shock, but do you have any idea what today is?" she snapped, cutting him off. My sister and I have a spa reservation in Napa in 4 hours. Our flight leaves at noon. This has been booked for 6 months. The doctor looked down at me. I saw his face change. The professional mask slipping just slightly, replaced by something closer to disbelief. I couldn't speak. There were wires and tubes everywhere. My chest felt like it had been split open with an axe, but I could hear every single word with perfect, brutal clarity. Mrs. Kessler, your husband may not survive the night. We really do need family here. He's a tough old man, Denise said, and I want you to hear this exactly the way I heard it, because I will never forget the tone. Casual, almost bored. Just give him something for the pain and keep him stable. I'll call when I land. I am not losing $4,000 on a non-refundable spa package because Walter decided to have a heart attack on a Thursday. The line went dead. She hung up on a cardiologist telling her I might die. I want to tell you the machines around me went crazy. The alarms started screaming. The nurses came running, and that part is true. My heart rate did spike, badly enough that they had to push more medication through my IV to bring it back down. But something else happened in that moment too. Something quieter and colder. Something that no monitor in that hospital could measure. Something in me simply closed, like a door swinging shut and locking from the inside. I thought about the day I met Denise, how she'd cried listening to me talk about Carol's final months, how she'd told me she'd never met a man who loved so deeply. I thought about the ring I put on her finger, the one with the emerald-cut diamond she picked out herself, because the round ones are so common, Walter. I thought about the house I built her in the hills outside the city, the walk-in closet the size of my childhood bedroom, the car I bought her for her 50th birthday that she called a nice starter gift, with a little laugh that I mistook, back then, for a joke. I understood, lying in that hospital bed with my own blood thinning under a fistful of medication, that I had never actually been loved by that woman. I had been managed, budgeted, tolerated, the way you tolerate a leaking roof until you can afford to replace it. And now, apparently, she believed she was about to collect. I made myself a promise in that bed, in that first hour of clarity, before the sedatives fully took hold. If I survived this night, Denise was going to learn exactly how wrong she was about who she'd married. I did survive the night, and the next 4 days in the ICU, I did something I hadn't done in longer than I care to admit. I paid attention, really paid attention, the way I used to when I was young and broke and couldn't afford to miss a single detail on a job site, because one bad measurement could cost me the whole contract. Denise and her son from her first marriage, Preston, showed up on day 3, not day 1, day 3. I later learned the spa trip had, in fact, gone ahead as planned, and she'd simply extended the layover on her way back to process the stress of my hospitalization at a resort in Sedona for 2 additional nights. When she finally walked into my hospital room, she looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, sun-kissed, glowing. Carrying a Louis Vuitton weekender bag, she sat down on my visitor's chair like it was the only thing in the room that mattered. "Walter, honey," she said, leaning down to kiss my forehead with lips that barely made contact. "You look so much better. The doctors say you're stabilizing beautifully." I didn't answer right away. I just watched her face, searching for something: guilt, fear, even embarrassment. I found nothing but mild impatience. The same look she used to give me when I talked too long about work at dinner parties. Preston hung back near the foot of the bed. 31 years old, an MBA I'd personally paid for, and a title at my company, Chief Financial Officer, that I'd handed him 2 years earlier because Denise had begged me to give him a real chance to prove himself. I loved that boy like he was my own for a while. I taught him to read a balance sheet. I brought him into board meetings. I introduced him to bankers I'd known for 30 years and vouched for him with my own name. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first company truck, arms crossed, studying the heart monitor behind my head like he was reading a stock ticker. "Dad," he said. He always called me Dad when he wanted something. "And Walter, the rest of the time, we need to talk about the company while you're recovering. The board's getting nervous. Cash flow questions on the stadium project. I think it makes sense for you to sign a temporary authorization so I can keep things moving without waiting on hospital visits for every decision." I let my eyelids droop. I let my voice come out thin and slurred, the voice of a man 3 heart attacks past caring about paperwork. "Whatever you think is best, son," I whispered. "I want you to understand something about me, whoever's listening tonight. I built an empire by reading rooms, by knowing when a subcontractor was lying about a material cost, by knowing when a bank was bluffing about interest rates, by knowing, down in my gut, when someone across the table wanted something from me, they weren't saying out loud. 41 years of that instinct does not evaporate because your heart tried to kill you. If anything, it sharpens, because now I had absolutely nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose sees more clearly than anyone else in the room. Denise fussed with my blanket for the benefit of a passing nurse, checked her lipstick in the reflection of the window, and glanced at her phone twice in 90 seconds. Preston pulled a folder from his leather bag and set it on my tray table with the practiced ease of a man who had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. "It's mostly standard language," he said. "Power of attorney, limited to financial matters, just so payroll and vendor contracts don't stall out. The lawyers drew it up this morning. It's really just a formality, Dad." He handed me a pen. His hand, I noticed this immediately. The way you notice a hairline crack in a foundation you're inspecting was not steady. A slight tremor, barely visible, but I'd built my whole career on spotting the barely visible. I made a show of squinting at the paper, my hand trembling on purpose, my breathing shallow and labored, playing a part I'd decided on somewhere around 3 in the morning during my second night in that ICU bed, staring at the ceiling tiles and doing the only kind of math that mattered to me anymore. The document was 11 pages. Preston had folded it open to the signature line on the last page. The way you fold a contract for someone you're hoping won't read the rest. But I've signed thousands of contracts in my life, and I know a folded page is a request to skip something, not an accident. I asked, in a weak, half-conscious mumble, if I could hold on to it and have my own attorney look it over, just to be safe, in case the board asks questions. Preston's jaw tightened for exactly 1 second before he smiled and said, "Of course, no rush, whenever I felt strong enough." That night, after they left for dinner reservations they'd apparently already made before even walking into my room, I asked the night nurse, a sharp young woman named Angela, who'd been kind to me since the moment I arrived, if she could do me a favor and get a message to my longtime attorney, a man named Frank Delacroix, who'd handled my business affairs since I incorporated Kessler Brothers in 1987. Frank was more than my lawyer. He was the closest thing I had left to a brother. Frank came the next morning before visiting hours, before Denise or Preston were awake enough to notice, and I handed him that folded document with my hands shaking for real this time, not for show. He read it twice. Then he looked up at me over his reading glasses with an expression I will remember until the day I actually do die. "Walter," he said quietly, "this isn't a limited power of attorney. Buried in Section 7, it's a general and durable power of attorney with full authority over all assets, including the right to sell, transfer, or liquidate company holdings and personal property without additional consent. If you sign this, Preston could legally sell Kessler Brothers out from under you tomorrow morning, and there'd be nothing you could do to stop it." I lay there in that hospital bed and felt something strange happen in my chest, something that had nothing to do with my damaged heart. Not fear, relief almost, because now I knew, beyond any shadow of doubt, exactly what kind of family I'd built around myself, and exactly what I needed to do about it. Here is where I have to tell you something about myself that I'm not entirely proud of, but I won't lie to you either, not after everything. I have always been a careful man. Long before Denise ever hung up that phone on Dr. Ferris, some quiet part of me had never fully trusted the way Preston looked at my company, the way he asked pointed questions about succession planning at family dinners, the way Denise had started mentioning, more and more often, how tired I looked, how maybe it was time to think about slowing down. 2 years earlier, after Preston pushed a little too hard for me to move company assets into a joint trust with him as co-trustee, I had quietly, without telling a soul, moved the actual operational control of Kessler Brothers into an irrevocable trust of my own design, with my old friend Frank as the sole successor trustee, completely separate from anything Denise or Preston had access to or even knew existed. The company they thought they were circling, the one Preston was so eager to get his hands on through a fraudulent power of attorney, was, on paper, already protected. What Preston was trying to steal from a dying man in a hospital bed was, without his knowledge, a fortress he had no key to. But knowing I was safe wasn't enough for me anymore. Surviving wasn't enough. I needed them to show me, completely and without any more doubt, exactly who they were, so that I would never again, for one single second of the rest of my life, wonder if I'd done the right thing. So I signed it. I signed the fraudulent power of attorney 3 days later, with Preston and Denise both standing over my bed, Denise dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue for the benefit of the same young nurse who'd carried my message to Frank. I signed it with a hand that trembled from real weakness now, because my heart was still healing, but with a mind that had never in my whole life been clearer. Frank had already prepared the paperwork on his end. The moment I signed, my hospital bed signature triggered nothing. It transferred nothing, because everything that document claimed authority over had already, quietly, 2 years earlier, ceased to be mine to give away. Preston thought he'd just been handed the keys to a kingdom. He'd been handed a set of keys to a house I no longer lived in. I watched relief pass between them like a current of electricity. Denise's shoulders dropped. Preston exhaled. Actually exhaled. Like a man who'd been holding his breath for days. "See, Mom," he said. "I told you Dad would understand. He knows the business needs to keep moving." I closed my eyes and let them believe, for exactly 11 more days, that they had won. Those 11 days were the longest and, strangely, the most peaceful of my life. I was discharged from the hospital and moved, at Denise's gentle insistence, into what she called a proper recovery space. A rented lake house 40 minutes outside the city, away from the noise and stress of home, she said, away from anything that might raise my blood pressure. I understood immediately what it actually was. Distance. She wanted me somewhere quiet and contained, while Preston, now believing he held full financial authority, began quietly reaching out to my company's largest institutional client, a regional hospital network I'd worked with for 11 years, to open early conversations about restructuring, our largest active contract conversations that, unbeknownst to him, Frank was monitoring every single step of, because a fraudulent power of attorney doesn't just fail to transfer assets, son. It creates a paper trail. And Preston, arrogant and untrained in the actual mechanics of corporate law, left that trail everywhere he walked. I spent those 11 days at that lake house doing something I hadn't done in probably 20 years. I fished. I sat on the dock in the mornings with a cup of black coffee and watched the mist come up off the water, and I thought about my father, about the $200 loan, about the version of myself that used to sleep in the cab of his truck because motel rooms cost money he didn't have. That man would never have let anyone treat him the way I'd let Denise and Preston treat me. Somewhere along the way, comfort had made me soft in places I didn't know I was soft. On the 12th day, Frank called me at 6 in the morning. He'd finished. Every transaction Preston had attempted, every email he'd sent representing himself as having full authority over Kessler Brothers, every meeting he'd taken with my hospital network client using my company letterhead, all of it documented, all of it clearly fraudulent, given that the power of attorney he'd used had been obtained under false pretenses from a man in intensive care. All of it enough, Frank said, to have Preston criminally charged with attempted fraud if I wanted to go that route. I didn't want prison for Preston. I want to be honest with you about that. Prison felt like it would let him become a victim in his own story, and I wasn't going to give him that gift. I wanted something else. I wanted him and his mother to understand, in the most complete and undeniable way possible, exactly what they had thrown away. I drove myself back into the city that same afternoon, my first time behind the wheel since the heart attack, and I walked into my own home, a home I still legally owned outright, a fact Denise had apparently never bothered to verify, without calling ahead. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, still in a silk robe at 2 in the afternoon, scrolling through what I later learned was a listing for a beach property in the Turks and Caicos that she and Preston had been quietly discussing purchasing once things settled. She looked up at me with genuine shock, and for one brief moment, I saw something almost like fear flicker across her face, the first honest emotion I'd seen from her in years. "Walter," she said, "you should have called. You look tired. You should be resting." "I am resting," I said. "I'm the most rested I've been in 9 years, Denise." I told her, calmly, without raising my voice even once, that I knew everything. About the spa trip, about the pill comment to Dr. Ferris, which the hospital, as it turns out, keeps on recorded line for quality assurance purposes, something neither she nor I had known at the time but which Frank had quietly subpoenaed as part of building our case, about the fraudulent power of attorney, about Preston's calls to my hospital network client. about the irrevocable trust that meant none of it had ever actually worked. I watched the color drain from her face in real time. "Preston was just trying to help," she said, her voice climbing, the practiced warmth completely gone now, replaced by something sharper and more honest than anything she'd shown me in years. "You would have died anyway, from what the doctors said. What was I supposed to do? Cancel a trip I'd already paid for?" "You were supposed to come to the hospital," I said. "That's all I ever needed you to do. Just show up." I filed for divorce that same week, citing our state's provisions for financial abandonment during a medical crisis, with Dr. Ferris's recorded phone line and Frank's documentation of the fraudulent power of attorney submitted as evidence. Because Denise had signed a prenuptial agreement 9 years earlier over her objections at the time, though her own father had insisted on it, she walked away from our marriage with the house I'd built her, the car, and a settlement that would have seemed enormous to almost anyone else on earth, and felt, to her, like a devastating insult, because she had genuinely believed, right up until the moment the papers were served, that she was about to inherit everything. Preston was quietly removed from his position as chief financial officer of Kessler Brothers Construction the following Monday, with the board's full and immediate support once Frank presented the documentation. I chose not to pursue criminal charges, not out of mercy exactly, but because I understood something Frank helped me see clearly. A courtroom conviction would have made Preston someone the world felt sorry for. What I wanted instead was for him to walk out into that world with nothing but the truth of what he'd actually done, and let every future employer, every future in-law, every person who ever asked him why he left a company his own stepfather built, hear the real answer. Marcus, my foreman, the young man who rode with me in that ambulance and held my hand when I thought I might not make it, is now my company's chief operating officer. I promoted him myself. In a ceremony I held on that same medical office job site in Cincinnati where I collapsed, standing on the same subfloor, in front of the same crew who watched me go down that morning. I told them all, right there, that I'd learned something in that hospital bed that I wanted every single one of them to hear directly from me. That the people who show up for you in your worst moment are the ones who deserve to stand beside you in your best ones. And every other relationship in your life needs to be measured against that one simple, brutal standard. I live alone now, in a smaller house than the one I built for Denise, closer to the water, with a dock of my own, where I fish most mornings before the sun is fully up. I am not lonely. I want to be clear about that, because I know some of you listening might expect me to end this telling you how empty it feels at the top, with no one to share it. It doesn't feel empty. It feels like the first honest quiet I've had in 9 years. My heart, according to my cardiologist, has healed better than expected for a man my age. Sometimes I wonder if that's because the actual weight sitting on it for so long wasn't cholesterol at all. It was Denise. It was Preston. It was every quiet warning sign I talked myself out of seeing because the version of my life I'd built with them was comfortable. And comfortable is a hard thing to walk away from, even when your gut has been telling you to walk away for years. I still wear my wedding ring sometimes, not out of sentiment for Denise, but because my father gave me the gold for it, melted down from his own father's ring. And that lineage means something to me that has nothing to do with the 9 years I spent married to a woman who valued a spa weekend over my life. I had it reset last month, actually. New band. Same gold. Frank thought that was a strange thing to do. Maybe it is. But a man my age has learned that you don't have to burn down everything that ever mattered to you just because one chapter of your life turned out to be built on sand. If there's one thing I hope you take from all this, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from tonight, it's this. Pay attention to who shows up when things go wrong. Not who shows up for the vacations, the parties, the good years when everything is easy and the money is flowing and there's nothing to prove. Anyone can love you when loving you is convenient. Pay attention to the moment your body fails you, the moment the money stops, the moment you become inconvenient, and watch very, very carefully who's still standing beside your bed. That's the only test that has ever mattered. It's the only one I trust anymore, and I nearly learned it too late, lying in a hospital bed listening to a hairdryer humming in the background, while my own wife decided a spa weekend mattered more than whether I lived through the night. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, because it tells me you understand what real loyalty is supposed to look like. Subscribe if you want more stories like mine. True stories about the moments that reveal exactly who the people around us really are. And tell me in the comments, honestly, what would you have done if you were the one lying in that bed? I read every single one of them, and I'd like to know I'm not the only one out here who finally learned to trust his own gut.